The Empire sent 10,000 ships to Earth. Only one came back. Far beyond the edge of human maps, in a part of the galaxy no telescope had ever reached, there existed an old and powerful nation called the Vorlon Empire. It had ruled the stars for over 6,000 years. It had conquered more than 400 worlds. Its ships were larger than mountains, and its soldiers wore armor made from metals that did not exist on Earth. The Vorlon people believed they were the strongest race in the galaxy, and for a very long time, no one had proven them wrong. The Empire grew not by making friends, but by taking what it wanted. When Vorlon scouts found a new world with life on it, they would study it for a short time, decide if the people there were strong or weak, and then act. If the world had a powerful army, the Empire would offer a trade deal, or sometimes even leave it alone. But if the world was weak, the Empire would take it. Its resources, its land, and often its people, would become property of the Empire. This had happened 400 times, and every single time, the weaker side had no way to stop it. It was in the year that humans called 2154, when a small Vorlon scout ship called the Whisperfang entered the outer edge of a system with a yellow star and 9 planets, one of which was a strange blue and green world called Earth. The scout ship's captain was a young officer named Tessic Rowe. He was ambitious, proud, and eager to make a name for himself. His ship was small and built for stealth, not for war. Its job was simple: fly close enough to a new world to gather information, then leave without being seen. Tessic had done this task 11 times before, on 11 different worlds, and each time it had gone smoothly. He expected this time to be no different. For 3 days, the Whisperfang orbited quietly on the far side of Earth's moon, its sensors listening to every radio signal, every television broadcast, every piece of data floating through human networks. The ship's computer collected the information and began forming a picture of the species that lived there. What it found surprised Tessic at first, and then made him laugh. Humans, the report said, were a young and violent species. They had only reached space travel a century earlier, and even now their ships could barely leave their own solar system. Their wars were frequent, and their weapons, though dangerous to each other, were nothing compared to what the Empire carried. Their planet had more than 8 billion people, spread across dozens of nations, many of which did not get along. They fought each other over land, over resources, over ideas. To Tessic, this looked like exactly the kind of world the Empire loved to find: rich in resources, full of potential slaves and workers, and too divided to ever fight back as one. "They will not even see us coming," Tessic said to his first officer, a quiet Vorlon named Elixa. "Divided people cannot defend anything. This will be an easy conquest." Elixa was not so certain. She had noticed something strange in the data. Human history, though short compared to the Empire's, was full of conflict on a scale that seemed almost impossible for such a young species. In just the last 100 years alone, humans had fought 2 wars that had reshaped their entire planet, had built weapons capable of destroying whole cities in seconds, and had learned to work together across nations only when a threat became large enough to unite them. She mentioned this to Tessic, but he waved it off. "They fight each other because they are children playing with toys," he said. "When they see a real enemy, an enemy who can flatten their cities from orbit without even trying, they will kneel. All primitive species kneel eventually." Tessic recorded his findings and sent them back to Vorlon space, using a message drone, a fast, unmanned ship built only to carry data across long distances. The message would take almost 4 months to arrive, but Tessic was confident about what it would say. Earth was ready to be taken. While the scout ship remained hidden near the moon, something happened that neither Tessic nor Elixa expected. A single automated satellite belonging to a human military organization detected an unusual gravitational disturbance near the far side of the moon. It was faint, almost nothing, the kind of reading that most systems would have ignored as sensor error. But this particular satellite belonged to a newly formed group called Earth Defense Coalition, an organization created only a few years earlier, after several nations agreed, for the first time in history, to share military technology and information, for the sole purpose of watching the sky. The reason for this new alliance was not something the Vorlon scouts had known to look for. Decades earlier, Human astronomers had detected strange radio signals coming from deep space, signals that did not match any natural phenomenon. The signals were faint and never repeated, but they were enough to convince a handful of scientists and military leaders that humanity was not alone in the universe. Quietly, without alarming the public, several of the world's most powerful nations had begun working together. They shared research. They combined military budgets. They built the Earth Defense Coalition, a small but growing organization, whose only purpose was to prepare for the day that contact might happen. It had been 8 years since the alliance formed, and in that time, humanity had made progress that no one outside the coalition knew about. Deep beneath mountains and oceans, scientists had been developing new kinds of engines, weapons, and shields, all based on strange technology recovered from a crashed object found in Siberia 11 years earlier. That object, though badly damaged, had given humanity a leap forward that would have otherwise taken a century to achieve on its own. The gravitational reading near the moon was passed up the chain of command until it reached a woman named Admiral Sarah Voss, the head of Earth Defense Coalition's Fleet Division. She was 53 years old, calm under pressure, and had spent the last 6 years preparing for a moment she hoped would never come. "Confirm the reading," she told her staff. "If there is something out there, I want to know exactly what it is before it knows we've seen it." For the next 2 weeks, human satellites and a small stealth probe, launched quietly without public knowledge, tracked the strange object near the moon. Eventually, the probe managed to get close enough to capture a faint image of the Whisper Fang before its cloaking systems adjusted and hid it from view again. The image was blurry, but it was enough. It showed a ship unlike anything built on Earth, sleek and metallic, clearly not human in design. Admiral Voss called an emergency meeting of the coalition's leadership. In a room deep underground, with representatives from a dozen nations present, she showed them the image. "We are being watched," she said. "We don't know by who or why or what they want, but we have to assume the worst. We have to assume this is a scouting mission, and scouting missions come before invasions." There was fear in the room, but there was also something else: readiness. This was the moment they had been preparing for. Plans that had been drawn up years earlier. Plans for defense, for secrecy, for uniting humanity's scattered military strength into a single force, were pulled from their vaults and put into motion. Meanwhile, aboard the Whisper Fang, Tessic Rowe had no idea he had been seen. His scout ship completed its mission and prepared to leave the system, its captain already imagining the praise he would receive from Empire Command for identifying such an easy target. Before departing, he sent one final message drone back toward Vorlon territory, this one carrying his full recommendation. Earth should be conquered swiftly, with overwhelming force, before the humans could develop any real defense. He did not know that humanity already had defenses far beyond what he imagined. He did not know that his scout ship's image had been captured, and he certainly did not know that 4 months later, when his message reached the Empire's ruling council, the decision they would make would set into motion a war unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Vorlon Empire's ruling council was made up of 12 members, ancient beings who had guided the Empire's expansion for centuries. When Tessic's report arrived, it was reviewed briefly and approved almost without debate. Earth was a small, primitive world, and its conquest was seen as routine business, no different from the 400 worlds that had come before it. The council ordered the assembly of a fleet, not a small fleet, not the kind used for minor conquests, but the largest fleet the Empire had sent to any single world in over 200 years. 10,000 ships, warships, transport vessels, supply ships, and command carriers, all gathered under the leadership of a decorated and confident admiral named Karth Dolvane. Admiral Dolvane had conquered 17 worlds in his career. He had never lost a major battle. When he received his orders to take Earth, he read the reports on humanity with mild interest and even milder concern. To him, the size of the fleet was less about the danger of the enemy and more about making a statement, showing the galaxy the full might of the Vorlon Empire in a swift and total conquest. 10,000 ships for one primitive planet, he said to his officers, almost laughing. This will be the easiest war of my career, and the most impressive to watch. He was wrong. But it would take him a very long time to understand exactly how wrong he was, and by the time he did, it would already be too late. The fleet began its journey toward Earth. It would take months to arrive, crossing the vast emptiness between the stars. And on Earth, humanity used every single one of those months to prepare, gathering its strength, sharpening its weapons, and readying itself for a war it had feared for years, but had always known, deep down, might one day come. The stage was set. The Empire believed it was marching toward an easy victory. Earth believed it was fighting for its very survival. Only one side was right, and the galaxy was about to learn a lesson it would never forget. 6 months passed, between the day Admiral Karth Dolvane received his orders and the day his fleet crossed into the outer edge of Earth's solar system. 10,000 ships moved through the darkness of space, in a formation so large that from a distance it looked like a small galaxy of its own, a slow-moving swarm of metal and light, heading toward a single blue and green world. On Earth, those same 6 months were spent in a way no period in human history had ever been spent before. Admiral Sarah Voss and the Earth Defense Coalition worked without rest. What had once been separate armies, separate navies, and separate space programs became one unified force. Soldiers who once might have been enemies now trained side by side. Scientists who once competed for funding now shared every discovery freely. For the first time in its long and violent history, humanity was not divided. Deep beneath the Ural Mountains, in a facility built specifically to study the crashed alien technology found 11 years earlier, engineers worked around the clock. The wreckage, though badly damaged, had given humanity working knowledge of two things that changed everything: a new kind of shield technology that could deflect energy weapons, and an engine design that allowed ships to move and turn far faster than anything built with human physics alone. Combined with humanity's own stubborn creativity, these discoveries had been turned into working prototypes, then into full production lines. By the time the Vorlon fleet was still 4 months away, Earth had built and armed 1,200 warships of its own. It was a tiny number compared to the 10,000 ships approaching, but these were not ordinary ships. Each one carried shields powerful enough to survive direct hits that would have destroyed older human vessels instantly. Each one carried weapons designed specifically to exploit weaknesses that Earth scientists had studied in the recovered alien wreckage, weaknesses they suspected other alien technology might share as well. Admiral Voss stood in the command center of Earth's newest flagship, a vessel named Resolve, watching a display that tracked the enemy fleet's slow approach. Beside her stood General Marcus Cade, the leader of Earth's ground forces, and Dr. Elena Reyes, the chief scientist behind the shield and engine breakthroughs. "They still don't know we've seen them," Voss said, looking at the tracking data. "Their scout ship left months ago. As far as they know, we're still just 8 billion people fighting each other with guns and old rockets." "Good," said Cade. "Let them think that. Let them come in expecting an easy fight." Dr. Reyes was less confident. "Even with the shields and the new engines, we are still outnumbered 8 to 1. If this becomes a fight of pure numbers, we lose." "Then it won't be a fight of pure numbers," Voss said. "It will be a fight of terrain, tactics, and surprise. This is our solar system. We know every rock, every gravity well, every blind spot. They don't." The plan Earth had built over those 6 months was not a plan to meet the Vorlon fleet head-on in open space. That would have been suicide. Instead, humanity built its defense around the solar system itself, using the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter as a natural fortress, filling it with hidden mines, automated weapon platforms, and staging points where human ships could hide, strike, and retreat before the enemy could respond. Beyond the asteroid belt, near the orbit of Mars, Earth built a second line of defense, 3 massive space stations, each one armed with weapons powerful enough to destroy a warship in a single shot, but slow to fire and difficult to move. These stations were meant to be the anchor of the defense, forcing the enemy fleet to either avoid them, which would slow their advance and break up their formation, or attack them directly, which would cost them heavily. And closest to Earth itself, in high orbit around the planet, sat the final line of defense, the bulk of the human fleet, waiting, hidden behind clouds of decoy satellites and false sensor signals designed to confuse enemy scanners. The Vorlon fleet, meanwhile, continued its approach with the same confidence it had carried since leaving its home system. Admiral Dolvain spent much of the journey in meetings with his senior officers, discussing not how to fight the coming battle, but how to manage the planet afterward. Which resources to extract first? How many humans would be needed as laborers? Which cities would be kept, and which would be cleared to make way for Vorlon settlements? To Dolvain and his staff, the outcome of the war was not in question. Only the details of victory mattered. His second-in-command, a sharp and cautious officer named Vex Ordanis, was the only one who seemed to hold any doubt. Vex had studied the scout ship's original report closely, and something about it bothered him. It wasn't the size of Earth's cities or the strength of its weapons, both of which seemed unimpressive by Empire standards. It was the pattern of human history itself. He noticed that whenever humans had faced a threat large enough, they had a habit of setting aside their differences and working together with frightening speed and creativity. "I am not saying we will lose," Vex told Dolvain privately, 3 weeks before the fleet reached Earth. "I am saying we should not assume this will be simple. Their history shows a species that adapts quickly under pressure." Dolvain laughed. "Every species says that about itself in its own historical records. Every species believes its own stories about resilience and cleverness. It means nothing when facing 10,000 warships. Even if they adapt, what can they adapt into? They have had 100 years of spaceflight. We have had 6,000. Vex did not argue further, but he quietly ordered his own personal battle group, 40 ships under his direct command, to remain slightly more cautious and spread out than the rest of the fleet during the approach. It was a small decision, made almost out of habit rather than real fear, but it was a decision that would later save more lives than he could have imagined. As the Vorlon fleet crossed into the outer solar system, past the orbit of Neptune, its scanners began picking up faint readings. Unusual gravitational fluctuations near the asteroid belt, strange bursts of static that seemed to come from nowhere, and what appeared to be debris fields that didn't quite match the expected pattern of natural asteroid clusters. Dolvain's science officers dismissed these as sensor errors, or simply unfamiliar features of an unexplored system. No one on the Vorlon side considered that these might be deliberate traps, carefully hidden by a species they had already decided was too primitive to build such things. The fleet continued forward, splitting into its standard attack formation as it approached the asteroid belt, a massive front line of warships, followed by transport and supply vessels in the middle, with a rear guard of additional warships bringing up the back. It was a formation that had worked for the Empire in over 400 conquests. It had never needed to change. On Earth, Admiral Voss watched the enemy formation appear clearly on her tracking screens for the first time as the fleet crossed the orbit of Neptune. 10,000 ships, spread across a formation larger than some human cities, moving steadily toward the asteroid belt where Earth's first line of defense waited in silence. "They're taking the direct route," Voss said quietly. "Straight through the belt. They don't even suspect it's a trap." "Should we hold fire until they're fully inside?" asked General Cade. Voss nodded slowly. "Let them get comfortable first. Let their front line pass the outer markers. We want as many of them as possible inside the kill zone before we spring it." Dr. Reyes, standing nearby, felt her hands tighten into fists. 6 years of preparation had led to this single moment. 6 years of testing shields, refining weapons, training crews, and running endless simulations, all building toward a battle that was about to begin in the cold silence of the asteroid belt. The Vorlon fleet's front line, thousands of warships strong, entered the outer edge of the asteroid belt without slowing down. To them, it was simply another obstacle to pass through on the way to easy conquest. Their sensors detected the asteroids, the drifting rock and ice, and adjusted course slightly to avoid the largest clusters, but nothing about their approach changed. There was no reason for caution. There had never been a reason for caution before. Admiral Dolvain stood on the bridge of his command ship, the Empire's Glory, watching the calm approach with satisfaction. "Send word to all ships," he said. "Once we clear the belt, prepare to establish orbit around the primary world. Standard conquest procedure. We will offer the humans one chance to surrender before beginning planetary bombardment of key military targets." His communications officer relayed the order across the fleet. 10,000 ships continued their slow, confident advance into the belt. What none of them knew was that beneath the surface of dozens of asteroids scattered throughout that exact stretch of space, human engineers had spent years installing thousands of hidden weapon platforms and mines, all connected to a single command network, all waiting for a single signal. Admiral Voss watched the enemy formation spread further into the belt, more and more ships entering the kill zone with every passing minute. She waited until the data confirmed what she needed. Nearly 6,000 enemy ships now sat within range of Earth's hidden defenses, spread out and vulnerable, completely unaware of the danger surrounding them. She took a slow breath, the weight of the moment settling over the command center. Every person in that room understood what was about to happen. This was not just the opening move of a battle. It was the moment that would decide whether humanity had a future at all. All defense platforms, Voss said, her voice steady and clear. Fire. In an instant, the quiet, empty-looking asteroid belt exploded into a storm of light and fire, as thousands of hidden weapons opened fire all at once, on an enemy fleet that had never seen it coming. The asteroid belt lit up like a field of dying stars. Thousands of hidden weapon platforms, built into hollowed-out rocks and drifting debris, fired at the same instant, sending beams of concentrated energy and waves of guided explosives tearing into the heart of the Vorlon fleet. Ships that had been cruising forward in calm formation only seconds before were suddenly caught in a storm they never saw coming. Admiral Karth Dolvane felt the Empire's glory shake beneath him as the first shockwave of the attack reached even the rear of the formation. Alarms blared across the bridge. Screens that had shown calm, orderly readings moments earlier now flashed red with damage reports pouring in from every direction. "Report," Dolvane shouted, gripping the edge of his command chair. "Unknown weapons fire, sir, coming from the asteroids themselves," his tactical officer said, voice tight with disbelief. "We're losing ships across the entire front line. I count over 200 vessels destroyed in the first 10 seconds. Dolvane stared at the display in front of him, watching dozens of small lights, each one representing a warship, blink out one after another. 200 ships, gone in 10 seconds. In 400 conquests, the Empire had never lost so many vessels in a single battle, let alone in the opening moments of one. "That is impossible," he said quietly. "They are primitives. They have had spaceflight for a century." But the numbers on the screen did not care what he believed was possible. They simply kept climbing. Deep inside the belt, hundreds of human warships that had been hiding among the asteroids, cloaked and silent, now surged forward to join the attack. These were the fast-strike ships Earth had built specifically for this kind of battle. Small, heavily shielded, armed with weapons designed to punch through Vorlon armor at close range. They darted between the wreckage and the confused enemy formation, striking hard and retreating before the larger Vorlon warships could target them effectively. Vex Ordanis, watching the chaos unfold from the edge of the formation where his own battle group had remained cautiously spread out, felt a cold certainty settle over him. He had been right to worry. Around him, ships from the main fleet were dying in numbers that should have been impossible, caught between the hidden mines, the surprise cannon fire, and now these small, fast human vessels that moved with a speed and precision the Empire had never encountered before. "Pull our group back," Vex ordered his own captains. "Do not engage the main cluster. Hold formation at the edge of the belt and prepare defensive positions." It was a decision that saved his 40 ships from the worst of the initial slaughter, but it did nothing to help the thousands of other vessels still caught in the trap. Inside the belt, the battle had become something closer to a massacre than a fight. Vorlon warships, built for open combat against enemies who fought in straight lines and predictable patterns, struggled to respond to an enemy that used the terrain itself as a weapon. Every time a Vorlon captain tried to maneuver away from the asteroid field, they found themselves exposed to fire from the human strike ships. Every time they tried to fight back against the hidden platforms, more human ships appeared from unexpected angles, hitting them from the side or from behind. Admiral Voss watched the battle unfold from the command center of the Resolve, her eyes fixed on the tactical display showing the destruction spreading through the enemy formation. The numbers were better than even her most hopeful projections. In the first 20 minutes of battle, over 1,100 Vorlon ships had been destroyed or disabled, for the loss of only 40 human vessels. Their formation is breaking apart, General Cade said, watching the same display. They don't know how to fight like this. They've never had to. Don't get comfortable, Voss warned. They still have nearly 9,000 ships left. This was the opening move, not the whole war. She was right to be cautious. As the initial shock of the ambush wore off, the surviving Vorlon ships began to regroup. Admiral Dolvane, furious and shaken but far from beaten, issued new orders across the fleet, pulling his remaining ships out of the deepest parts of the asteroid belt and into more open space, where their superior numbers and firepower could be brought to bear more effectively. Concentrate fire on the largest asteroid clusters, he ordered. If their weapons are hidden inside the rocks, then we destroy the rocks. The Vorlon fleet began firing on the asteroids themselves, massive blasts of energy tearing apart the very hiding places that had allowed Earth's ambush to succeed. Slowly, the advantage of surprise began to fade, and the true scale of the coming battle started to reveal itself. 9,000 ships were still an overwhelming force, and Earth's 1,200 warships, even with their advanced shields and clever tactics, could not hope to match them in a direct, prolonged fight. Admiral Voss made a difficult decision. Pull our forces back to the second line, she ordered. Let them push through the belt. We've bloodied them enough here. Now we lead them into the next trap. Human ships began a controlled retreat, falling back from the shattered asteroid field toward the orbit of Mars, where the 3 massive defense stations waited. The Vorlon fleet, angry and eager to punish the enemy who had humiliated them, pursued. Admiral Dolvane knew this could be another trap, but his pride and his anger were louder than his caution. Nearly 9,000 ships remained under his command, still a force far larger than anything Earth could hope to field. He was not going to let a single ambush, however costly, stop the conquest of an entire planet. Continue the advance, he ordered. We take their fleeing ships as an insult, not a warning. Press forward. Show them the true might of the Empire. As the Vorlon fleet pushed deeper into the solar system, chasing the retreating human ships toward Mars, Vex Ordanis found himself growing more and more uneasy. He had watched the battle in the asteroid belt with careful attention, and something about the way the humans fought bothered him deeply. They had not fought like a desperate, disorganized species trying to survive. They had fought like a force that had planned every single move, months, maybe years, in advance. The ambush had not been a lucky trick. It had been engineering, discipline, and patience, qualities the Empire's reports on humanity had never mentioned. He approached Dolvane privately as the fleet crossed toward Mars. Admiral, I request permission to hold my battle group in reserve, away from the main formation, until we understand what other traps may be waiting. Dolvane, still furious over the losses in the belt, looked at him with contempt. You wish to hide while the rest of the fleet fights, Vex. I wish to survive long enough to win the war, sir, not just this battle. After a long moment, Dolvane waved a hand dismissively. Do as you like. Keep your 40 ships out of the real fighting if it comforts you. The rest of us will finish this quickly. Vex accepted the order without argument, quietly grateful, and pulled his battle group further back from the main fleet's formation, trailing behind at a distance, watching and waiting. Ahead, near the orbit of Mars, the 3 human defense stations powered up their weapons for the first time in true combat. Each station carried a single massive cannon, built using technology adapted from the recovered alien wreckage, capable of firing a single devastating shot every few minutes. Slow, but powerful enough to destroy even the largest Vorlon warship in one hit. As the Vorlon fleet approached the stations, Dolvane ordered a full frontal assault, confident that sheer numbers would overwhelm the 3 fixed positions quickly. Thousands of ships surged forward, weapons blazing, aiming to destroy the stations before they could do serious damage. The first station fired. A beam of pure energy tore through space and struck the lead Vorlon warship dead center, vaporizing it instantly. The second station fired moments later, striking another vessel with the same devastating result. The third station's shot missed its intended target, but tore through 2 smaller ships that happened to be in its path. The battle at Mars had begun, and it would prove to be the bloodiest, most chaotic fight the Vorlon Empire had ever experienced in its 6,000-year history. The battle around Mars raged for hours, longer than any single engagement the Vorlon Empire had fought in living memory. The 3 human defense stations, though slow to fire, tore through the enemy fleet one devastating shot at a time, each hit removing an entire warship from the battle in an instant. But 3 stations, no matter how powerful, could not stop 9,000 ships alone, and Admiral Dolvain knew it. "Divide the fleet," he ordered, his voice tight with frustration. "Half the ships continue pressing the stations directly. The other half moves past them, toward the human homeworld. We do not need to destroy every obstacle. We only need to reach the planet." It was a reasonable decision, the kind of decision that had won him 17 previous conquests. But Admiral Voss had expected exactly this move. The defense stations near Mars had never been meant to stop the fleet entirely. They were meant to slow it down, to force the enemy to split their forces, and to buy time for the third and final part of Earth's defense to prepare. As roughly 5,000 Vorlon ships broke away from the fight at Mars and pushed toward Earth, they found the space around the planet eerily quiet. No massive fleet waited to greet them in open battle. Only a scattering of small satellites and sensor drones, easily destroyed or ignored. "They have nothing left to defend their homeworld directly," one of Dolvain's officers reported from the secondary command ship leading the advance. Their remaining forces must have been spent in the earlier engagements. This was not true, but it was exactly what Earth wanted the Empire to believe. Hidden in high orbit around Earth, cloaked behind clouds of decoys, false sensor signals, and debris fields designed to mimic empty space, the bulk of Earth's remaining fleet waited in complete silence. Over 800 warships, along with the full might of Earth's planetary defense network, thousands of ground-based weapon platforms capable of striking targets in low orbit, sat ready and undetected. Admiral Voss watched the approaching Vorlon ships on her display, her hands steady despite the tension in the room. "Let them get close," she said quietly. "Let them believe they've already won." The Vorlon fleet advanced toward Earth's orbit, weapons ready, expecting to begin the process of demanding surrender or beginning bombardment. As the lead ships crossed into range of the planet's upper atmosphere, alarms suddenly blared across their bridges as thousands of ground-based weapons opened fire from the surface below, joined instantly by the hidden fleet dropping its cloak and surging forward from every direction at once. It was, in some ways, an even more devastating ambush than the one in the asteroid belt. The Vorlon ships that had pushed ahead toward Earth found themselves caught between orbital human warships above and planetary defense cannons below, with nowhere safe to retreat, and no way to know the true size of the force attacking them until it was far too late. Back at Mars, the battle had reached its own breaking point. The 3 defense stations, though they had destroyed hundreds of enemy ships, were finally beginning to fail under the sustained assault of thousands of Vorlon warships concentrating their fire. The first station's shields collapsed after nearly 4 hours of continuous bombardment, and moments later the station itself was destroyed in a massive explosion that lit up the surrounding space like a second sun. The remaining human ships at Mars, no longer needing to protect a station that had already fallen, shifted into a new phase of the battle, using their speed and maneuverability to strike at the exhausted, disorganized remains of the Vorlon force still fighting there. Dr. Reyes's shield technology, tested now through hours of real combat, had proven itself again and again, allowing human ships to survive hits that would have destroyed them outright only months earlier. Admiral Dolvain, still aboard the Empire's Glory near Mars, received the reports from the fleet advancing on Earth with growing horror. Ship after ship reported being caught in a massive ambush, surrounded and destroyed. Within the first hour of the attack near Earth, more than half of the 5,000 ships sent ahead had already been lost. "This is not possible," Dolvain said, staring at the reports. "A primitive species. A single planet. This is not possible." But it was happening, and no amount of disbelief would change the numbers scrolling across his screens. Vex Ordanis, watching from a safe distance with his 40-ship battle group, saw the full picture forming with terrible clarity. Humanity had not built a defense meant to protect its homeworld through a single desperate stand. It had built a trap with multiple layers, each one designed to bleed the Empire's forces further, using terrain, deception, patience, and technology that seemed to grow more effective with every hour of battle. This was not the behavior of a primitive species clinging to survival. This was the behavior of a species that had been preparing, quietly and carefully, for exactly this moment. By the 12th hour of continuous battle, the numbers told a story that would have seemed impossible only a day earlier. Of the 10,000 ships that had entered Earth's solar system, more than 8,000 had already been destroyed or disabled beyond repair. The remaining Vorlon forces, scattered, disorganized, and cut off from clear communication with each other, fought on more out of confusion than any real strategy. Admiral Dolvain, watching his once mighty fleet collapse around him, finally gave the order he never imagined he would have to give. "All remaining ships," he said, his voice hollow, "retreat, fall back, return to Empire space immediately." But retreat was no longer simple. Human ships, faster and more maneuverable, pursued the fleeing Vorlon vessels relentlessly, cutting off escape routes and picking off stragglers one after another. The asteroid belt, once a hidden trap, was now a graveyard of wreckage that further slowed any ship trying to flee back the way it had come. The Empire's glory itself, Dolvain's own command ship, was struck by concentrated fire from 3 human vessels working together, its shields collapsing under the combined assault. Dolvain felt the ship shudder violently around him as emergency systems fought to keep it functional. "Get us out of here," he shouted to his helmsman. "Any course. Just get us away from this system." The Empire's glory limped toward the edge of the solar system, badly damaged, barely holding together. One of only a handful of ships still capable of retreating at all. Behind it, the once massive Vorlon fleet was reduced to scattered wreckage and a small number of surviving vessels desperately trying to escape a battle they had entered with absolute confidence only hours earlier. Vex Ordanis, seeing the full collapse of the fleet unfolding before him, made the only decision he believed could save any part of the Empire's forces. He gathered his 40 ships and moved to cover the retreat of the survivors, using his battle group as a shield to allow as many damaged Vorlon vessels as possible to escape the system. It was a costly decision. Human ships, sensing an opportunity to destroy even more of the fleeing enemy, pressed the attack hard against Vex's rearguard. One by one, his ships were destroyed, sacrificed to buy time for others to escape. By the time the last surviving Vorlon vessels crossed the outer edge of the solar system and entered the safety of open space beyond human sensor range, only a single ship remained intact enough to make the long journey home. It was the Empire's glory, badly damaged, carrying Admiral Dolvain, a handful of surviving crew, and the terrible knowledge of what had happened to the largest fleet the Vorlon Empire had ever assembled. Behind them, Earth's defenders did not celebrate. They understood, even in victory, the cost of what had just happened. Thousands of human lives had been lost defending their world. Nearly 10,000 enemy ships lay destroyed across the solar system, a graveyard of alien wreckage that would take years to fully clear. Admiral Voss stood in the command center of the Resolve, watching the last enemy ship disappear from her sensors as it fled into deep space. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply turned to General Cade and Dr. Reyes, her voice quiet but firm. "They know about us now," she said. "And somewhere out there, they're going to tell their entire empire what happened here today." She was right. And far beyond the edge of the solar system, aboard a broken ship limping through the darkness of space, Admiral Karth Dolvain stared silently at the empty seats around him, once filled with officers who would never return home, and began preparing the report that would change how the entire Vorlon Empire saw the galaxy forever. The journey home took 4 months. For Admiral Karth Dolvain, every single day of it felt longer than the last. The Empire's glory limped through space with barely a third of its systems working. Its once proud hull was scarred and broken in dozens of places, patched together with whatever materials the surviving engineers could find. Of the thousands of crew who had once served aboard the great ship, only 211 remained alive. The rest had died defending it during the final hours of the retreat, or had been lost when entire sections of the ship were sealed off and sacrificed to keep the vessel from breaking apart completely. Dolvain spent much of the journey alone in his quarters, staring at nothing, replaying the battle over and over in his mind. He had entered Earth's solar system with 10,000 ships and the full confidence of an empire that had never truly been defeated. He was returning with one broken ship, and the weight of a disaster no one back home could possibly imagine. Vex Ordanis, one of the few senior officers who had survived, spent his time differently. He worked. He reviewed every scrap of data the ship's damaged sensors had managed to record during the battle, trying to understand exactly how humanity had done what it did. He studied the shield technology that had allowed human ships to survive hits that should have destroyed them. He studied the tactics, the ambush in the asteroid belt, the layered defense around Mars, the hidden fleet waiting near Earth itself. Slowly, a picture began to form in his mind, one that filled him with a deep and quiet unease. Humanity had not won through luck. They had won through preparation, unity, and a willingness to sacrifice that matched, and in some ways exceeded, anything the Empire had ever seen from a conquered species. More troubling still, all of this had been achieved by a civilization barely a century into spaceflight. Vex could only imagine what such a species might become given another century, or 2, or 10. When the Empire's glory finally crossed back into Vorlon territory, word of its return spread quickly. A single ship, returning alone from a fleet of 10,000, was not something that could be kept quiet. By the time the ship reached the Empire's capital world, crowds of officials, reporters, and curious citizens had already gathered, drawn by rumors that something had gone terribly wrong. Admiral Dolvain was brought before the ruling council almost immediately. The same 12 members who had approved the invasion of Earth with barely a moment's discussion now sat in stunned silence as Dolvain stood before them, exhausted and hollow-eyed, and told them what had happened. He spoke of the ambush in the asteroid belt, thousands of hidden weapons opening fire in an instant. He spoke of the 3 defense stations near Mars, each one capable of destroying a warship with a single shot. He spoke of the final trap near Earth itself, an entire fleet and planetary defense network that had remained completely hidden until it was too late to escape. He spoke of watching ship after ship disappear from his sensors, of losing contact with officers he had served alongside for decades, of the long, silent retreat through a graveyard of his own fleet's wreckage. When he finished, the council chamber remained silent for a long moment. "You are telling us," one council member finally said, her voice careful and measured, "that a single planet, populated by a species with barely a century of spaceflight, destroyed 9,999 of our ships?" "Yes," Dolvain said simply. "That is exactly what I am telling you." Another council member, an old and stern figure who had approved dozens of conquests over his long life, leaned forward. Perhaps the reports on this species were flawed. Perhaps they had help from another power we do not know about. Vex Ordanis, standing quietly near the back of the chamber, stepped forward. "Council members, I have studied the data from this battle extensively during our journey home. There is no evidence of outside help. Every weapon, every tactic, every ship we encountered was built by humanity itself, developed and produced in a matter of years, not centuries. What we faced was not a fluke, and it was not the result of secret alliances. It was the natural result of an entire species uniting around a single purpose and applying everything they had toward survival." "And what purpose was that?" asked the council member. "Defending their home," Vex said. "Nothing more complicated than that. We saw them as primitive because they had not yet expanded beyond their own solar system. We never considered that a species could become this dangerous while staying entirely focused on defense rather than conquest." The council debated for hours after Dolvain and Vex were dismissed from the chamber. Word of the disaster spread quickly through Vorlon space, reaching other worlds under the Empire's control, reaching rival powers who had long resented Vorlon dominance, reaching every corner of a galaxy that had, for 6,000 years, believed the Empire to be unbeatable. For the first time in centuries, that belief was shaken. Some among the Empire's council argued for an immediate second invasion, a larger fleet, 20,000 ships instead of 10,000, enough overwhelming force that no defense, however clever, could hope to withstand it. Others argued for caution, pointing out that Earth's technology had clearly been improving rapidly even before the battle, and that a species capable of building the kind of defenses that had destroyed the First Fleet might be capable of even greater advances, given more time to prepare for a second attack. In the end, no final decision was made immediately. The council needed more information, more study, more time to understand exactly what they were dealing with before committing to another massive and costly campaign. For the time being, Earth was left alone, watched carefully from a distance, but not attacked again. Back on Earth, humanity did not know how the Empire's council would decide. All they knew was that the immediate threat had passed, and that the cost of the victory had been enormous. Millions of lives had been changed forever by the battle. Entire industries had been built and rebuilt in just a few years to produce the ships and weapons that had saved the planet. Families across the world mourned soldiers, pilots, and engineers who had given their lives defending a world that most people, only a decade earlier, had not even known was in danger. Admiral Sarah Voss stood before the leaders of the Earth Defense Coalition in the months following the battle, delivering a report on what had been learned and what needed to happen next. "We won this battle," she told them, "but we did not win the war. We don't know if the Empire will return with a larger fleet, or if they will decide we are too costly to bother with. We don't know if there are other powers out there watching what happened here, powers who might see us as either a threat or a potential ally. What we do know is that the galaxy is no longer a mystery we can afford to ignore. The Coalition, once a quiet organization known to only a handful of world leaders, became the foundation for a new, permanent alliance among the nations of Earth. Military forces that had once belonged to separate countries were formally merged into a single, unified defense structure. Resources that had once been spent on old rivalries were redirected toward research, expansion, and preparation for whatever might come next from beyond the solar system. Dr. Elena Reyes continued her work studying the recovered alien wreckage that had given humanity its first real advantages in shield and engine technology, now joined by new data recovered from the wreckage of the destroyed Vorlon fleet itself. Each ship they studied taught them something new, pushing human technology forward at a pace that would have seemed impossible only a decade earlier. Far away, aboard a quiet supply outpost near the edge of Vorlon territory, Vex Ordanis, now promoted to fleet admiral after the disaster that had ended Dolvain's career, stood looking out at the stars, thinking about the report he had given to the council months earlier. He believed, deep down, that the Empire would return to Earth eventually. Pride alone would demand it, but he also believed that whenever that day came, humanity would be ready for it, just as they had been ready the first time. On Earth, life slowly began returning to something resembling normal, though nothing would ever truly be the same again. Children in schools now learned about the battle as part of their history lessons, taught that humanity's survival had come not from any single hero or weapon, but from unity, preparation, and the refusal to give up, even when facing an enemy that outnumbered them nearly 10-1. At night, when people looked up at the stars, they no longer saw only distant lights. They saw the edge of a much larger world, one filled with dangers they were only beginning to understand, and possibilities they had never imagined before. Humanity had survived its first true test as a species among the stars, but everyone from Admiral Voss to the youngest soldier who had fought in that terrible battle understood one simple truth. This was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning.